So, the 2025 British Touring Car Championship begins in just over a month's time, once again taking place on the national layout of Donington Park, aka my nearest racetrack. The season will see a slight increase in grid size, thanks to the removal of the expensive hybrid technology, with 24 cars expected to take to the starting grid of the first meeting, an increase from 19 from the previous year, thanks to Paramax Racing thankfully giving us reassurance that they'll be on the grid this year. But despite this increase, there will be one noticeable absence from the 2025 season, and that is from four-time champion Colin Turkington, who just over a month ago announced that he would not be returning to the BTCC for 2025, citing a combination of reasons for his decision that he didn't delve into during his announcement video on his YouTube channel. Now, this isn't the first time that Colin has left the series, but unlike back then, this one felt a little different, as due to everything he has achieved in the BTCC, it really did feel like an end of an era, with him being the last big name from the mid-2000s to the late 2010s to compete in the championship. Until Gordon Shedden announced his return almost a fortnight ago. Now, it's unclear at this stage whether Colin will actually return to the championship in the future, as in that same announcement video, he didn't rule out the possibility of that happening. However, I think it's safe to say at this point that the general consensus from the BTCC community is that it did appear like the 2024 season was indeed his last, and in this video, I thought it was only fitting that we went through his entire career. This is the story of Colin Turkington's amazing BTCC career. Born in Portadown, Northern Ireland on the 21st of March 1982, which makes it ironic that today is his birthday today, Colin started his racing career quite late, starting when he was approaching the age of 11, taking part in the Ulster Karting Series in 1993. After spending 3 years in karting and picking up accolades along the way, Colin would transition to car racing in 1996, competing on the autograss scene for 2 years, before finally switching to the racetrack in 1998, competing locally in the Northern Irish Metro Championship, where he would capture his first car racing title. 1999 would see Colin move over to mainland Britain, where he would finally compete on the BTCC support package, taking part in the Ford Fiesta Z-Tech Championship, where in his third year in 2001 he would clinch the championship, beating Matt Pinney to the title by 15 points. After impressing on the support package, Colin would finally make the step up to the British Touring Car Championship in 2002, competing with the sister West Surrey racing team, which was sponsored by the girl pop band Atomic Kitten, hence the team name, Team Atomic Kitten. With the team opting to miss the first meeting of the season, Colin would make his debut in the second meeting at Alton Park, but the first half of the season would end up being a struggle, with Colin failing to score a point, with him retiring in 4 of his first 6 races, with him even missing Mondello Park, the closest circuit to a home race for him, due to illness. But the second half of the year would be a lot kinder to Colin, as despite not scoring a point up until this point, Colin would do the unthinkable and grab his first ever podium at Croft, finishing 3rd behind David Leslie's Proton and James Thompson's Vauxhall. Colin would follow that up with a 5th place finish in race 2 and would grab more points in the next 2 meetings. His season would tail off in the remaining 5 races, which saw him score no points, and in the end he would finish the year in 14th, being only 3 points behind teammate Gareth Howe, who finished 2 places ahead of him in 12th. Despite the shaky rookie season, his raw speed was clear to see, so much so that when new rules were brought in to prevent teams from entering 2 separate teams, Colin was promoted to the main WSR team for 2003, driving a 3rd manufacturer-backed MG alongside Anthony Reid and Warren Hughes. And even though he would end up finishing behind both his experienced teammates, Colin would have an impressive season, so much so that in the second visit to Brands Hatch Indy, Colin in race 2 would take his first ever BTCC win, winning by just over 1.3 seconds ahead of Paul O'Neill's Vauxhall, with Alan Morrison rounding off the podium in his Honda. Colin would remain with WSR for 2004, even despite the team losing manufacturer backing from MG, and although he would once again be beaten by his more experienced teammate Anthony Reid, who would be Colin's only teammate for 2004 after WSR reduced the number of entries from 3 to 2, Colin would once again have an impressive season, finishing 6th in the championship, 2 places higher than 2003, picking up another win along the way, this time at his home race of Mondello Park. But despite another impressive season, Colin would not remain with WSR for 2005, as due to WSR reducing their entry to just 1 seat, which would end up going to Rob Collard, Colin would end up switching teams and would effectively have an upgrade, as he would end up at 888 Racing, who at the time was running the Vauxhall program, who heading into 2005 were the reigning champions. Colin would replace the outgoing reigning champion James Thompson and would partner alongside 2003 champion Ivan Muller and a fresh-faced Gavin Smith, who replaced the Seat-bound Luke Hines. Despite all the expectation, however, 2005 would end up being a tricky year for Colin, as even though he would grab another 2 wins at Croft and Mondello Park, Colin would struggle to adapt to the new Astra, which would make its debut in 2005 and would often flounder around the lower reaches of the point, getting beaten heavily by his more experienced teammate Ivan Muller, as well as the 2 Honda Integras of eventual champion Matt Neal and Dan Eves, along with the Seat of Jason Plato. This meant, as a result, Colin would end up finishing 6th in the championship, made worse by the fact that Tom Chilton, who finished 1 point ahead of him in 5th, didn't do the full campaign, with him missing the opening meeting at Donington Park and also the final meeting at the Grand Prix layout of Brands Hatch. With him struggling to gel with the new Astra, Colin would end up leaving Vauxhall after just 1 year and would return to WSR for 2006, partnering alongside Rob Collard, as a result of the team becoming a 2-car operation again, thanks to backing from their new title sponsor, RAC. After a disappointing year in 2005, 2006 would end up being a redemption year for Colin and would end up being to date his best year in the BTCC, with him grabbing another 2 wins at Thruxton and Donington, with him being a constant presence on the podium, which in turn would lead to him finishing 3rd in the standings, just missing out on the runners-up spot by 1 point to Jason Plato. His standout year would see him remain with WSR for 2007, which would end up being a new era for the team, as after 6 years with MG, the team would switch to a BMW 3 Series from 2007, and would see the team switch from a front-wheel drive car, as someone rightly corrected me in the comments in my Matt Neal vs Jason Plato video, to a rear-wheel drive car, and would end up being the start of a long and successful partnership. 2007 and 2008 would see Colin adapt very quickly to a rear-wheel drive configuration and would see him continue to fight for wins and podiums throughout those 2 years. But even so, he was still not in a position yet to challenge for the title. That was until 2009 came around. After winning the championship back-to-back in both 2007 and 2008, many were expecting the Vauxhall of Fabrizio Giovanardi to go into the season and win the title again in 2009. But whilst he would finish 2nd in race 1 at Brands Hatch Indy, the first meeting would end up being a disaster for him, as Gio would end up finishing 16th in race 2 thanks to sustaining a puncture, and would end up retiring in race 3 after being involved in a lap 2 collision with Rob Collard and Stephen Jelly, who is actually returning to the championship this year with One Motorsport. Colin, meanwhile, would start the year off strong, with him grabbing 2 podiums at the opening meeting, and then grabbing a win at the following meeting at Thruxton after a close fight with Fabrizio Giovanardi, which saw Colin overtake the reigning champion on the last lap. After being T-boned by Adam Jones in race 1 at Donington, which saw Colin getting beached into the gravel and finishing 5th in race 2, Colin would start to churn in a series of results, as a 2nd place finish at race 3 at Donington was followed by 4 wins in the next 2 meetings, with him receiving the pole position point in 1 of them and the fastest lap point in 3 of them. A 2nd place finish and another win at Snetterton was followed by a consistent run of results in the following meetings, which consisted of a few podiums and a handful of top 5 finishers. This meant that heading into the final meeting at Brands Hatch Grand Prix, Turkington led the championship by 13 points ahead of Giovanardi, with Jason Plato being a further 15 points back in his Chevrolet and having an outside shot of winning it as well. The meeting would not start off great for Turkington, as he would finish race 1 down in 8th thanks to him carrying a lot of success ballast, allowing both Gio and Jason to close up in the standings, with Gio finishing 3rd in that race and Jason going on to win the race after a photo finish with the Ford of Tom Chilton. Race 2 would end up being better for Colin, as he would grab the final podium spot in 3rd, but with both Gio and Jason finishing in front of him, with Jason making it 2 out of 2 wins, it meant that going into the final race, Colin only led the championship ahead of Giovanardi by just 4 points, with Jason another 4 points behind, with his 2 wins no longer making him an outsider. But luckily for Colin, he would start in front of the pair of them for race 3 thanks to the reverse grid draw. However, even with this slight advantage, he knew he needed to do a bit more if he wanted to win his first title, especially with Giovanardi's teammate Matt Neal being on pole. And by God would he do so in one of the most amazing drives you will ever see. At the start, both Colin and Giovanardi would gain a place on the slow starting Paul O'Neill to move themselves up to 5th and 6th respectively, with Gio trying to put early pressure on Colin, whilst Jason would lose a place at the start to Tom Onslow Cole's Ford. Heading out of Graham Hill Bend, and Neil in front would go slightly wide, allowing Jonathan Adam to take the lead and causing chaos behind, as Chilton would tack the back of Collard's motor-based BMW, sending him into the barriers and out of the race. In front, Neil, not taking his mistake very well, would lunge it down the inside of Adam at Surtees and spin him into the gravel trap, ending Adam's race in the process and giving Chilton a chance to go through. Neil would fend off Chilton heading down into Hawthorns and would begin to try and back the pack up in order to try and help his teammate get ahead of Turkington. This wouldn't work, however, as Turkington at the same corner would manage to get alongside Tom Chilton and would be able to complete the move at Westfield, moving up into 2nd, with Giovanardi also following suit. But before Neil could have a chance to back Colin up again, the safety car was brought out in order to clear up the stranded cars that were caught up in lap 1 incidents. Once the safety car came in after only 2 laps, Neil would try again to back Colin into Gio, with Gio initially having an opportunity to do a switchback on Colin at the exit of Hawthorns. But, wise to this, Colin would shut the door on Gio, forcing him onto the grass and nearly allowing Chilton to go through on the Vauxhall driver. A lap later, and after Colin thought about a late move on Neil into Surtees, Gio would get better traction than the BMW driver heading down into Hawthorns, and with Neil backing Colin up again, Gio fancied his chances on the outside of Colin heading into Westfield. However, in doing so, the pair would make contact, with Gio being forced slightly wide and allowing Chilton to take full advantage and grab P3 from the Italian. Gio would continue to be held up by Chilton for the next 3 laps, and with Neil continuing to back Colin up, it allowed the Chevrolet of Jason Plato, who had quietly made his way through the order after a terrible start, to close up and get onto the back of the group, putting pressure on Giovanardi. Sensing the danger, Gio, after getting a quick run out of Graham Hill Bend, would make a move down the inside of Chilton into Surtees to move back up into 3rd. However, in doing so, it also allowed Plato to get through on Chilton as well, thanks to him getting better traction out of Surtees, with Jason also nearly getting Gio as well, heading into Hawthorns. A lap later, and back at the front, Neil was once again trying to back Colin into Gio. However, after many laps of being stuck behind, Colin had had enough, and heading into Druids, Colin, after Neil defended the inside, would tap the back of the Vauxhall driver, sending him wide, and as a result would take the lead of the race. But in doing so, it also allowed Gio to get ahead of Neil. But even with Gio giving him bother behind, that wasn't the main concern for Colin. In the process of making contact with Neil at the exit of Druids, Colin would sustain slight damage to his rear left toe link, which in turn would see his car slightly crab on the straights. And with his car slightly wounded, Colin would have to drive around the problem for the rest of the race and keep Gio behind if he wanted to win his first title. Meanwhile behind, Jason would move up to third as a result of his arch nemesis Neil going off at Sheen Curve, and would then a few corners later take the lead as a result of Colin aggressively shutting the door on Gio at the exit of Clark Curve, which allowed Jason to go through on Gio, and then would overtake Colin in an impressive move around the outside at turn 1. Heading into the final corner again, and Colin would once again defend aggressively on Gio to prevent a switchback, this time forcing him onto the grass and allowing Chilton, like he did on lap 5, to go through on the Italian to split the pair of them. With Jason leading the race and pulling away, Colin couldn't afford to lose any more places, as although he could afford to drop back to 4th, the threat of Gio and Neil being behind him and potentially taking him out was still there. And so, even with a handicapped car, Colin would need to drive out of his skin to hold on to P2. And by some miracle, he would do that, as Colin, despite the issues with his rear toe link, would somehow be able to pull a buffer from Chilton as the laps ticked by, whilst Gio, seeing the championship slip away, would start to drive on the ragged edge, nearly binning it a few times in the process. And even with Chilton closing back up to Colin in the closing stages, he couldn't find a way through on the BMW driver. As Jason Plato came through to become the second driver to win all 3 races, Colin Turkington, despite his toe link issues, would come through to finish in second, and with it became the 2009 British Touring Car Champion. After it looked to be game over after sustaining damage from the collision with Neil, Colin managed to put in a godlike performance to drive around the problem and clinch his first title in the toughest way possible. With a drive like that, Colin announced himself to the world and made everyone finally take note of how much of a serious force he was in the BTCC, with many needing to up their A-game if they wanted to dethrone him in 2010. But there was, however, one problem with that. Colin wouldn't actually return to the BTCC for 2010. In fact, he wouldn't compete in the BTCC for a while, as for the next few years, he would dip his hand in other championships, such as the Scandinavian Touring Car Championship and even the World Touring Car Championship, which saw him grab a win in 2010 at the Okayama circuit in Japan, formerly known as TI-ADA. It wouldn't be until 2013 when Colin would make his return to the BTCC, once again driving for West Surrey Racing in a 1 Series BMW. But before the season began, Colin would have a different sort of battle than one he would have on the track. Before the 2013 season got underway, Colin revealed to the world, after everyone noticed via the WSR driver reveal photo, that he had been diagnosed with a minor case of Bell's palsy, a condition which makes the nerves on one side of the face completely freeze and numb up, which can often lead to side effects once someone has recovered from the condition. Luckily, in Colin's case, any side effects he did have after he recovered from it wasn't very noticeable, and although he would carry the condition into the season, he didn't let it phase his driving, as although he would get off to a slow start, things would start to click at the second meeting at Donington, as in race 3, he would take his first win since 2009, winning by over 4 seconds ahead of the Team Dynamics Hondas of Shedden and Neil. Colin would achieve 4 more wins during the year, along with a few more podium finishes, to finish 5th in the standings, with him running circles around his 2 teammates Rob Collard and Nick Foster, with them finishing down in 13th and 15th respectively. Then in 2014, Colin in his second year back would remind everyone that 2009 was not a fluke, as after taking victory at the opening meeting at Brands Hatch Indy, Colin would go on an absolute tear in the middle part of the season, taking victories at Thruxton, Alton Park and Croft, and then would take 2 more wins at Rockingham later on in the year to win his second BTCC title at Race 1 at Brands Hatch Grand Prix, with the final gap in the end being 35 points ahead of nearest rival Jason Plato. After winning his second title convincingly, Colin felt it was time for a new challenge, and so for 2015 he would not remain with WSR and instead moved to Team BMR, driving a Volkswagen CC, partnering alongside Jason Plato, along with Aaron Smith, who nowadays is known as Aaron Taylor Smith, and team owner and undoubtedly the greatest driver in the world, Warren Scott. With him switching to Volkswagen, it marked the first time since 2006 that Colin would drive a front-wheel drive car, but it's safe to say that even though he had driven a front-wheel drive car before, he had been too used to driving a rear-wheel drive car for nearly a decade, and this would show in his results, as although he would take 4 wins during the year, he couldn't get on terms with his teammate Jason Plato, who would end up being the nearest challenger to eventual champion that year, Gordon Shedden. Colin would finish the year 4th in the standings, being 7 points behind 3-time champion Matt Neal and a further 27 points behind teammate Jason Plato, who missed out on the title by 4 points. I have done a video about that series finale, so go check it out after this video. Despite the tricky season, Colin would remain with BMR for 2016 as the team would enter a brand new era, as along with receiving manufacturer backing for the season, the team would also switch from the Volkswagen CC to the Subaru Levorg, becoming the 3rd team in the history of the BTCC to run an estate car, following in the footsteps of Volvo and Honda. It also meant that after only 1 year of driving a front-wheel drive car, Colin would revert back to a rear-wheel drive car for 2016, and whilst 2015 would see Jason have the upper hand, this time around it would be Colin who would have the upper hand, but if he thought he could regain his crown from 2014, he was very much mistaken. Firstly, the season would not get off to the best of starts, as the team would end up being way off the pace compared to all the other manufacturer-backed teams, with Colin only achieving 2 points finishes in the first 2 meetings, which were a disappointing 10th and 12th places respectively. This would be compounded even further when the team were forced to withdraw from the meeting at Thruxton due to safety concerns involving a fire that ended James Cole's race at Donington Park, a meeting that I was in attendance for. Cannot believe that was 9 years ago, by the way. Once the team returned at Alton Park, things looked to have finally clicked for the team, with them having an upturn in performance which allowed Colin to achieve 5 wins in the remaining 7 meetings that year, which was enough for him to finish the year 4th in the standings, just missing out on 3rd to Matt Jackson. But even despite this uptick in performance, Colin was not convinced about the project going forward, and so after only 2 years he would end up leaving BMR at the end of the season, and for the 3rd time in his career he would return to WSR, this time with full manufacturer backing from BMW. This initially would prove to be a mistake, as although Colin would be in a position to fight for the title again, he would ultimately miss out, as 2017 would end up being the start of the rise of Ash Sutton, a man who Colin would have a close rivalry with in the years after. After making his debut in 2016 with the manufacturer-backed MG team that was run by 888 Racing, Ash would move to the BMR team for 2017, replacing the BMW-bound Colin Turkington. and in only his second year in the BTCC, Ash would completely demolish his teammates, including the experienced Jason Plato, to win his first ever BTCC title, beating Colin to the championship by 24 points and becoming the first and to date the only driver in the BTCC to win the title with an estate car. But undeterred from his apparent mistake in switching teams, Colin was determined to put things right in 2018 and prove to everyone that his return to WSR was not a mistake. And thankfully for Colin, he would do just that, as despite only taking one win during the year, essentially doing a Richard Burns from 2001, Colin's consistency compared to his rivals was enough to bag him his third BTCC title, thanks in large to both Ash Sutton and Tom Ingram getting disqualified from race 2 at Knockhill due to failing a ride height inspection. This led to some fans believing that Colin's title win was a fluke, as without both Sutton and Tingram's disqualifications, one of those two would have won the title instead of Colin. But determined to prove people wrong again, Colin would enter the year in high spirits, as with BMW debuting their new 3 Series from 2019, the team would completely dominate the first half of the season, with him and 2013 champion Andrew Jordan grabbing victories in the first half of the season, with Colin leading the standings after Alton Park thanks to him being more consistent than Andrew. However, a controversial rule change with the ballast system during the summer break would evaporate the BMW's advantage, as although Colin would still be able to grab a win at Snetterton, ultimately this change would allow their rivals to catch up, particularly Dan Camish, who, after making his debut in 2018, replacing the outgoing Gordon Shedden, was now in prime position to challenge for his first title in 2019. And initially, it was looking like it was heading his direction, as thanks to a controversial collision involving his teammate Matt Neal and Colin Turkington in race 2 at Brands Hatch GP, which took Colin out of the race, Camish, thanks to finishing third, would take the lead in the championship by 8 points ahead of Turkington heading into the final race. And with Colin having to make his way through the order from 25th on the grid, it looked to be an impossible task for him to retain his title. But in one of the most dramatic title deciders the BTCC has ever seen, Colin would somehow prevail, as after charging his way through the order, which saw him get as high as 6th, even getting ahead of his rival Dan Camish, Colin would be handed the title on a silver platter, after Dan would crash out with 2 laps to go at Hawthorns, thanks to his brakes completely giving up the ghost, in the same way Leon Haslam lost the British Superbike title 2 years prior. Colin, taking full advantage of this, would come through to win a record equalling 4th BTCC title, becoming the second driver to do so after Andy Rouse in the mid-80s. I would go into detail about that dramatic title decider in this video, but seeing how long this video already is, I recommend you go and watch Aidan Millward's video about it in the description below. Personally speaking though, although it was an amazing title decider, I still maintain that the title decider from 2015 was slightly better than this one, but that's just my opinion. Colin's celebration after he won his 4th BTCC title said it all. However, little did we know at the time, it would end up being the last time that Colin would win the BTCC title, as although he would challenge for the title again in the pandemic-affected 2020 season, he would ultimately miss out on the title again to Ash Sutton, who at this point had switched to an Infiniti Q50 as a result of Team BMR merging with Aidan Moffat Racing. Ash would retain his title in 2021, this time in more convincing fashion, and it would end up being the last time that Colin would come anywhere close to challenging for a title, as in the remaining few years of his career, Colin would either be an outsider for the title, or would end up playing second fiddle to his teammate, most notably Jake Hill, who would end up joining the team at the start of 2022, which would eventually culminate in him winning his first BTCC title in 2024, just beating 2022 champion Tom Ingram to the title by just 8 points, with Colin being credited for playing a huge supporting role for Jake. With how his final few years played out, it led to speculation whether Colin would continue in the championship or not, with him being radio silent about this during the off-season. But eventually, in February 2025, we would get an answer, as on the 14th of that very same month, Colin would upload a video onto his YouTube channel announcing that he would not return to the BTCC in 2025, citing a combination of factors that led to his decision. The announcement left people sad that he wasn't able to do a proper goodbye to the BTCC given what he had achieved in the series. But for me, it's no surprise that he's decided to walk away this way, as with Colin known for being a quiet and private person, he's always been one for not wanting a fuss, and so in that regard, we do have to respect him in this area. Plus, on top of this, he has stated that he hasn't ruled out a possible return to the championship in the future, but with him not getting any younger, and with him wanting to focus more on his son Lewis's racing career, it's highly unlikely in my opinion that we will see Colin make a return in the future, with his video that he uploaded in February feeling more like a retirement speech than a goodbye for now speech. But regardless of what the future holds, one thing's for certain is that Colin has left an amazing legacy in the BTCC, with him going toe to toe with many of the BTCC's top drivers and him coming out on top on many occasions, with him being very respectful to the drivers around him and no one having a bad word to say about him. Colin's driving style, along with his calculated approach to racing, is why he will always be regarded as one of the best to ever grace the sport, and it's one that has paved the way for many drivers that have come after him. So if this is the end of Colin's time in the BTCC, I hope he enjoys his retirement, as I think I speak for everyone, he has well and truly earned it.